Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we are ready to start our session with question and answer time. We have our Apostle Locke Mackay and Field Support Minister Dina DeVormer from the Northeast USA Field with us, along with the Mission Center President team. We are recording our session for posting, and it is live on Facebook. So we're going to welcome your questions. You can type them in the chats, or if you know how to use the raise hand feature, you can do that as well, and we'll be able to recognize individuals to speak. And make sure that's an option we can do. Okay, I think we're ready. So we welcome you all this morning. We'll have this time until about 10:30, and then we'll keep this meeting open, but we'll stop the recording while we transition to prepare for the worship at 11 o'clock. So let us know what questions you have. I don't see any questions in the chats yet or anybody raising a hand. So I'll maybe get things started as more people get in and think of their questions. If you joined us yesterday, we had a question and answer session with President Steve Beasy and had asked him several questions about the overall direction of the church. And we might ask a few of those this morning of our field leaders as well. But it looks like Locke's got a hand raised.
Maybe this is intentional. We're all muted and can't unmute. Is that the plan?
Yes, we're just, if you could raise hand and then we can unmute or.
Great. Okay.
And you the ability to unmute, so.
Great. I was just going to share that I have a few more updates to maybe spark some questions if helpful as well, but you had already started, so let's hear yours first.
I was going to ask one of the ones we asked yesterday was about greater numbers of people in the U.S. context seeming to be identified as spiritual without religious affiliation, at least in an institutional church setting. How do you envision disciples engaging with community of Christ outside of traditional congregation structures?
Is that one for me?
Yes, Locke, for you and or Dina, what are you seeing already, and what do you envision might be happening in this area?
So what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing it in Michigan as well, and I think this is going to look different post-pandemic, but also the same, meaning some of the models that we're seeing develop, I think will continue in the form that we're seeing them online, but some will migrate to in-person, and some will probably migrate to hybrid, doing both at the same time. But what I am seeing that is reaching spiritual but not religious are some of the gatherings that are informal, although there maybe is a book to discuss or a spiritual practice to be engaged with. There are groups that are primarily spiritual formation, and they'll come together once a week or once a month for a spiritual practice that is shared. Then they might follow that with discussion. I'm seeing lots of study groups, though. People who, we would call it disciple formation, but people who want to better themselves, learn more, go deeper. I'm seeing a fair number of those kinds of expressions. I'm seeing things like in this, again, the pandemic got in the way of, but even just one that I'm personally involved with is a group that comes together generally every 2 or 3 weeks. And it started as a discussion with a Latter-day Seeker who has now decided they're ready for baptism, but it's kind of evolved into something that's more just a theological discussion. although often it ends up focused on the historicity of Jesus or the history of some of the New Testament books. So kind of a deep dive into first and second century development of the scriptures, for example. So there's just all kinds of options. And I keep sharing, and some people get uncomfortable with this, but I think if we can identify the things that we as individuals are passionate about and find others who share that passion and invite them to share together in that passion, that there's going to be power in that. And yes, I recognize that seeking discernment is helpful, but I've just bumped into a lot of folks who have been doing a particular ministry, maybe it's pastoring for 20 years, but they're only doing it because nobody else will. And it's just sucks the life out of them eventually because it's not their passion. So if you're in that place, I would encourage you to think about, to pray, to explore what ways might you engage in ministry that do involve your passions as they relate to the mission. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Locke. Did you want to share those additional updates?
Sure, if maybe just to get them out of the way, and some of them might spark discussion. Let me minimize that for a minute. So these are in some ways just announcements, but this seems like a good time to do it. So don't forget online Advent service 12 December from the World Church. That's going to be shared at 4 a.m. and 2 p.m. As you know, World Conference is delayed. The new dates, 21 to 29 April 2023. And I'll try and drop those in the chat, or maybe somebody else could. 21 to 29 April 2023 World Conference dates. There's also, as Steve mentioned yesterday, an online gathering, worldwide online gathering, 9 to 11 June 2022. And that's going to be discussing nonviolence, but it also will help us explore the ways in which we can gather internationally online. So 9 to 11 June 2022, World Church Online Gathering focused on nonviolence. Giving Tuesday is November 30th. We have a generous matching contribution of $250,000. So your gifts will be matched up to the first $250,000, November 30, Giving Tuesday. One of the things that I think makes us, as part of the soul of Community of Christ, one of the things I love about Community of Christ is our international nature, that we have members around the world and we're trying to figure this out together. And one of the things that's happening that has really helped drive that home for me is the Historic Sites Foundation Church History Without Boundaries lecture series, which is taking place at the moment. You can get details at historicsitesfoundation.org, historicsitesfoundation.org. They've had lectures on the life and legacy of Apostle Kasuki Sakine, our first Japanese apostle, on the church in continental France, on the church in Wales, on the church behind the Iron Curtain. Coming up, Ben Smith is talking about green shoots, Tiona and the Green Cathedral. And so it's kind of an interesting way that they are using and developing their reunion ground in New South Wales, Australia, which I think the folks in Michigan would find fascinating, the way that reunions have played out in the culture of the church in Australia. Now, there are different tax laws related to weddings, I'm sure, so and marriages. So remember that as you listen. But Tiona and the Green Cathedral, and then the story of the Community of Christ in England, those two are coming up. The others are available to view in recorded form online, historicsitesfoundation.org. Finally, I have a need for a couple who might be interested in volunteering as the Heritage Plaza team leads in Independence, Missouri. This historic site is right across the street from the stone church. Your view from the living room is the temple spiral and the auditorium across the temple lot. In addition to overseeing the Heritage Plaza, which is the F.M. Smith study and the Jones Flournoy house, we also would have this couple helping to support landscaping at the temple. So it's a dual focus. We need people who are physically capable and enjoy, weeding, trimming, cutting, maybe mowing, things like that. So Heritage Plaza team lead that will also help with temple landscaping. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Locke. Dina, did you have any additional updates or announcements to share?
I don't have any updates or announcements, but I would have maybe anticipated some people might have been curious about the cat behind my head yesterday. I saw at least one chat saying hi to my little kitty cat. So in case you are curious, that cat's name is Misha. And you don't be surprised if you see one walking across my screen or behind me today too. So, but no, I don't have any additional updates, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any, other than that silly one. So.
And we didn't have time for Bridge of Hope questions yesterday, so we're expecting lots of those this morning.
Thanks. Well, I haven't seen any questions come in yet. Are there any on Facebook? I'm not monitoring. No? Okay. So those who have joined us since we started, we are taking questions. You can either put them in the chats on Facebook or here in Zoom, or if you can raise your hand, we'll call on folks for questions as well. Eleanor West.
I'm muted now. Yesterday, I couldn't get unmuted. This is for Dina. Dina, did I understand yesterday that we give to, like Ann and I are giving to Bridge of Hope, but it's not getting credit by the Mission Center? Were we to contact you to let you know, or will you help us? Because the way it was set up at the time that we did it, we couldn't do it through our congregation. So any help there with that?
Sure, Eleanor, great question. So there are a couple different moving pieces here. So you as an individual, when you are contributing to Bridge of Hope, you are supporting the overall worldwide goal of the World Church, which is critical and very important, and we encourage you to continue to provide that support. There is a distinction, though, between individual gifts and gifts that are coming directly from a congregation or a mission center. So the field, the Northeast field, which is that additional kind of that bite-sized piece of the goal that I referred to yesterday, when congregations as an entity decide to give to Bridge of Hope or the Mission Center, that's what we call a community gift. And that does support the field share of the goal. So you need to continue doing what you're doing as an individual. It won't impact our field share of the goal. But if your congregation decided that you did want to assist the field share of the goal, then there are a couple ways that can be done. One of the easiest ways to do it is to put a line item in your budget for Bridge of Hope support. And let's say that you decide to do that. And if so, then you as individuals in your congregation, you just continue to give to the congregation, to their congregation ministries, the operating fund. Then that allows the CFO to send in that support to Bridge of Hope from the congregation. That then designates it as what we refer to as that community gift, which does provide support towards our Northeast field share of the goal. Another way that some congregations are contributing to the community gifts aspect, which supports the Northeast Field share of the goal, is that some of you have decided that maybe the third Sunday of the month, the loose plate offering is being allocated, designated for Bridge of Hope. Those dollars are also considered community gifts, and that supports the field share of the goal. So those are the two main ways that congregations can contribute to help the field accomplish its goal. So there is that distinction, and that's important for CFOs to know to code them properly, and they can contact me or Jessica if they have any questions in regards to that. So congregations can provide gifts either from their affiliate investment pool accounts if they have them, or if they don't have an affiliate investment pool account, they can still provide gifts from checking accounts or savings accounts or those things. But those of you who do have an affiliate investment pool account, it's really important that I am kept in communication in regards to those gifts that are provided, because we want to make sure that that reduces the minimum balance that your congregation is required to maintain. So let's say that you have a minimum balance of $20,000 and you decide you're going to give $5,000 to Bridge of Hope. You need to make sure that when you send in the request that you want to give that gift from your affiliate investment pool account, that you've copied me in on that so that I can help make sure that your minimum balance is reduced from that $20,000 down to $15,000 because you've already provided that $5,000 gift. Along that same line, though, even when you provide just a gift from your checking accounts, I still would like to be looped in and communicated with so that I can help monitor and make sure that it gets properly tracked, and that our field then gets credit for that gift. So much longer answer than you were anticipating, Eleanor, but we just have kind of two different moving things happening simultaneously.
Eleanor, did you want to ask more?
One more question. You know that we sold some of our property recently. Does that can go toward this community gift because of our congregation's amount to you?
Yes, it absolutely does. So sale of properties, the net proceeds that are contributed, that is the other key component that is coming in for our field share of the goal. And you may remember, I don't expect you to remember the exact dollars by any means, but the bulk of our progress that has been made towards our field share of the goal has come from property sales. So we have achieved $3.3 million approximately of our $6.72 million goal for the field, and almost 2.6 million of that has come just from property sales. So Eleanor, Boyne City, with its generous extension of providing some money from the sale of that vacant land, most definitely has helped the field share. It's just in that different pie of the goal. It's in the property sales component versus the community gifts, because but it does indeed support the field share, and we're so grateful for that.
Dina, there was a follow-up from Grand Valley. So are you saying that there is no way that individual giving can be credited to the field goal?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The only way that individual giving could be is if you actually were providing it to your congregation instead, and your congregation then provided through its budget that gift. So envelope giving to Bridge of Hope does not support the field share of the goal. It would if you give it to the congregation ministries and the congregation has provided it in their budget.
So there is a way to do it, but it has to be given to the congregation, and the congregation then gives it.
Correct, but you can't. But it's not really designating it that way. So when you provide an offering envelope that says Bridge of Hope on it, it's going to go to Bridge of Hope individual. You can't designate your pet projects when you give to congregation ministries or the operating fund. It's just implied that you may be giving an additional amount because you know that your congregation has provided support through its budget to Bridge of Hope. So, but you can't say, I want this $50 of my $100 congregation ministries gift to be given to Bridge of Hope. You can't do that, because that's really just the same thing as if you had written down Bridge of Hope. Can't give those gifts with those types of strings attached would be the best way to say it.
So you'd have to build it into the congregation's budget, pass the budget.
Build it into the budget, yeah. So pass a budget that says that, or do, as I said, the loose plate money on a particular Sunday that you may have designated that. And we do have several of our congregations that are doing that currently, but you as an individual don't get credit for that loose plate, because it's in essence what it is. It's loose. It's not designated for anything else.
Lee Ecker.
Yes, I'll follow up on that one. What is the real difference between the mission of Hope Mission, or whatever that is, and tithing? I mean, it all goes to the same pot, doesn't it?
So worldwide mission tithes and Bridge of Hope, which I'm assuming is the question that you're asking, Lee, they are two different things. So worldwide mission tithes, which is what we provide through our offering envelopes or e-tithing, supports the annual operations of the worldwide church. So the church budget, that when you see those charts on the website in regards to the World Church Finance Board meeting and approving a budget for the operations of the worldwide church, that's worldwide mission tithes. Bridge of Hope is a separate fund within the worldwide financial situation that is specifically supporting, there's two phases of Bridge of Hope. The first phase is to provide the retirement responsibility. That's that $120 million goal by January 1 of 2024. Once that objective has been obtained, Bridge of Hope will still continue to exist, but it will have a new emphasis of building up our endowments. You may remember that it's not that we don't have endowments, but that a lot of our endowments are tied up in real estate assets. So they're not liquid and available to support the mission of the church. So that would be the next phase of it. So the best question that gets asked quite often is, as an individual contributor to the church, what should I be providing my dollars to other than to my local congregation, which of course is very important for us to do. But from the worldwide church aspect, we would encourage you to give to worldwide mission tithes. And then if you have additional gifts that you want to give, so what we would sometimes refer to as tithing versus maybe a sacrificial offering, maybe you've received a special bonus at work, or you've received a bequest from a family member that you weren't anticipating. So it's kind of bonus money for you. If you had additional dollars that you wanted to support as an individual, you could then contribute those directly as an individual to Bridge of Hope. But we would first encourage you to support your congregation's mission and also worldwide mission tithes. If there is a year where the worldwide mission tithes budget exceeds, income exceeds expenses, there is a portion of that budget that will ultimately contribute to Bridge of Hope. So, but when you're making those difficult decisions of where do I put my individual dollars, that's what we would be encouraging you to do. So they are different but related.
This would be a follow-up related to Bridge of Hope, but not necessarily specifically to that we asked President Veazey. Some members feel disconnected from Community of Christ leaders and see congregations closing or buildings being sold, even with congregations staying organized, with the focus on selling the property for funding their retirement obligations. And this gives the sense that leaders may be preparing for Community of Christ as a whole to dissolve. How would you respond to that perspective?
So I understand why members feel like that in some cases. But I would say we should have been looking at our real estate holdings and the way that we use congregational buildings and others long before the need for Bridge of Hope came up. We should have been having difficult discussions 15 years ago about whether or not we were fully utilizing our buildings for mission, or are we just using them 2 hours a week. And of the discussions that we have had related to building sales and Bridge of Hope, I can think of only one where we really initiated it, that we even applied any pressure. Now, we have invited people to consider discerning the future of their building, but only once that I can think of did we actually strongly encourage. It was in a different mission center. There were 2 active participants, and there had only been 2 active participants for a significant period of time. We should have done it years ago in that case as well. So I understand why people are linking the two, but we need to be fully focused on mission and engaging our limited resources on mission. And the reality is sometimes the best use of those resources is not to tie them up into a building that is lightly used. I am strongly supportive of keeping buildings that are fully engaged, being used for mission. And I am strongly supportive of congregations, as we know them, continuing to survive and thrive. I think we have to have both congregations and new expressions for the foreseeable future. We have to have both. So if any of you have heard anything I have said as congregations are done, that is not what I'm saying. They are critical to the future of the church. Back to door hours, church 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, when Protestantism arrived, Catholicism didn't go away. It just looked different. And as Church 3.0 continues to develop, Church 2.0, those traditional congregations, in some cases will not go away. They'll hopefully thrive, but there will be fewer of them, and they'll probably look different. So I think it's important to consider how we are using buildings, but if we're using them in a way that is engaged in mission, I'm fully supportive of keeping them. Dina, do you want to jump in?
I would just add a couple comments in regards to the one congregation that Locke indicated that we needed to encourage a conversation to occur that needed to happen for a while. That was an uncomfortable situation. I was personally involved in it, but ultimately the end result ended up being a very, very positive place for those 2 individuals who had been hanging on with dear life to this building. They did not realize ultimately that once they had sold the building and had merged, had joined another congregation, how much they had been missing out on the overall fellowship of the saints, being able to not feel burdened by this, that they felt guilt unnecessarily. But once they were able to join with another congregation, begin to feel nurtured again, it was one of those things that I was grateful that we had taken that, made that difficult conversation happen, because ultimately those folks ended up being in a much better, happier place and were able to provide more ministry than what they had been previously, because they were once again then being able to be nurtured in this new community. The other aspect that I would add is that while you may see us put an awful lot of emphasis on property sales from the standpoint of helping us achieve our field share of the goal, and that would most definitely be true, that we're asking for a pretty significant portion in many cases to be contributed to Bridge of Hope. I will also let you know that there are instances where the dollars that are staying locally with the congregation that is maybe still continuing to exist or that is being shared with the Mission Center are being used for exciting ministries as well. In one of our mission centers, there has been a staff position that has been added specifically for invitation ministries. In other areas, they're exploring just creative things that they have not been able to do before because the resources are then shared with the congregation and the mission center to utilize in a new way rather than just paying the utilities to the Consumers Energy or whoever it might be. So there are some real positives that we see coming from that as well. So it provides support to Bridge of Hope, which is an important objective for us, but also allows ministry to continue in new and exciting ways because of those freed up resources.
Ann Harvey is asking for some examples of Church 3.0. I heard some wonderful ones yesterday from Linda. Is she willing to share some of the new expressions happening in Michigan?
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for that question. So yesterday we had a short session on some new expressions in the Mission Center. I don't have my slide in front of me, so I'll go from memory what I had on there. But one of the examples was Peace in the Pines. Winnie shared for a few moments about Peace in the Pines, which is meeting at Park of the Pines weekly for dinner and a short worship, which I think Winnie, you said is more like a devotion time, being together in community in a new way. Another expression or a Church 3.0 in Michigan is Beyond the Horizon, which meets online on Tuesdays and is a community that's made up of half Community of Christ members and probably half non-members who are people from other faith traditions or who are unchurched. People have made their way into this community through different avenues, a friend of a friend, or someone heard about something through another person. And actually, the community that's forming there are several people who have actually never met in person. I am the person who leads the group, and there are at least 2 or 3 people that, even though we've been journeying together for about 2 years through the pandemic, actually never met in person. But the relationships that are forming are still as deep. We're still using Community of Christ material, like the Witness the Word sermons. We're still using the Herald mission stories, but it looks completely different. We don't have a traditional worship service, but we're still getting together, we're discussing, we're being formed spiritually, but we're doing it in a way that looks different than what we're used to traditionally seeing as church. Another example of that would be God Without Borders that meets Mondays. Karen Smith leads that up. And that is strictly centered around sharing stories and encounters with the Spirit and accepting the gifts that each person brings. So we're doing actually a lot in Michigan right now in new ways of being the church and exploring some new ideas. Oh, another one that would be new this year is our youth ministry, Little Fish, which meets on Tuesday nights and is for kids, just born all the way up to grade 6. And I think on the outside, it looks like it's just a youth ministry. We do stories and we sing and we share. But really what's happening is a lot deeper than that. They have their own church community that they're forming. And it's sort of the same thing where maybe a lot of them haven't met in person yet, but they really are making friendships and being formed together. At Sanford's Campoween weekend, my kids, Arbor and Emmy, had an opportunity to meet 2 kids that they've met every week on Little Fish for months and months, but hadn't had the opportunity to meet in person yet. And I got really choked up when I saw them look at each other for the first time. You could just see that click. You know, that's my friend. I know them. We get together every week. But it looks completely different than what we've ever seen. So I think when I think about what Church 3.0 is in Michigan, the idea really is that it isn't just one thing. It's a lot of different things, and it's being, you know, open to new ways that the Spirit is forming us in communities that we just haven't seen before. So I don't know if that's a clear answer, or if you have a follow-up question, I'd be happy to talk more about it.
While you think about that, I'll jump back to the earlier question for just a minute. I just want to stress that in almost every case, you know, one example that I can think of, it was congregational leaders deciding they needed to do something different with their building. It was not field or mission center leaders saying, you need to sell. We've asked the question, are you fully utilizing your building for mission? But we have not had to go to the place where we're strong arming congregational leaders into selling. I also want to repeat something I said earlier. I don't know, maybe it was spring. They all kind of run together, but it's just so important that congregational leaders understand that it's not that they have failed or done something wrong if they make the decision to sell a building or close a congregation. There are extraordinarily powerful cultural changes taking place. Many of them, pandemic on top of that, these just extraordinarily difficult times for Christianity in North America and other places. Fortunately, not all places, not Southern Hemisphere, but extraordinarily difficult times. It's not that you have done something wrong. The ground is shifting under our feet quickly, and it's a seismic shift. I don't know if it's 6.08. I don't know. It's huge. So don't feel guilty. You've, in so many cases, devoted your lives to this and done amazing work and touched countless lives and planted so many seeds that will continue to produce fruit in ways that we don't fully understand. But traditional Christianity in North America is changing.
Locke, you talked just there about the changing context. I wonder if you could maybe expand a bit about what we're seeing. For the church, it seems that the most rapid growth is in other parts of the world, the non-Western cultures. Working on the Council of 12, maybe if you could give us some insights into what that looks like. And then within the US context, we seem to be experiencing in many places, including Michigan, that LDS seekers are growing in numbers and participation. So maybe if you could speak to the global perspective and then what we're seeing in changes in the US.
Yeah, so I just spent 2 days in conversation with other members of the Council of 12 and with presidents of 70, talking about new expressions and the pushback that we kept getting from leaders outside of North America, particularly from Central and South America and from Africa, is that this is a Western world problem. You know, this idea of new expressions isn't relevant in Africa or Central America. Traditional congregations are still the model there and still thriving. So it's kind of, we're coming from two very different places, and we recognize that right up front. But this is not a worldwide problem. It's not a problem in the church around the world. It is particularly North America, Australia, Europe problem. So, you know, I keep going back to congregations are going to be an important part of the life of the church in the future. unquestionably in those places. And I believe in North America as well, although we might look different, and there'll be fewer of them. Latter-day Seekers, I think, are having a wonderful impact on the life of the church. And I know most of us probably were a little nervous early on about the impact they might have on the church. And they're often coming from very different theological places than Community of Christ members. So there's the Doctrine and Covenants section, is it 117, from Kirtland in the 1880s, saying, don't worry about the impact that Latter-day Seekers will have on the church. Now that's my, that's the Latter-day Seekers part is my language, but that's what they're saying. There was an influx of new folks from Utah at the time, and we were panicking. What are they going to do to us? They're going to change us. My experience is the change they bring is the result of the fact that they expect us to be who we say we want to be. So it's not that they're going to change us in a negative way. It's that they pull us towards who we are trying to be. The reasons they are attracted to us is they like what we say we are going to be. Now, that's kind of a problem, because if we say this is who we want to be, and they connect to a congregation or a group, and we don't reflect that, we're not even trying, that's a problem. But when we are trying to live out our enduring principles and our mission initiatives, they will jump right in with us and pull us forward. There's also a different culture, and maybe it's a culture that we used to have. The church is central to their identity. And so a challenge that we have is seekers often want to be fully engaged every day, somehow engaged in the work of the church. And we sometimes don't know what to do with that. It's not Sunday. What are you doing? And they just consume our resources. We'll send them a book or something that we think will keep them occupied for weeks, and they'll get back to us in days or less, having read it cover to cover and digested it.
Thanks, Locke. I'm wondering maybe if you could expand on that or continue in this line of thinking. A question we asked President Veazey was about the vision for Community of Christ into the future from an overall perspective of the church. And then a follow-up was, is there a strategic plan that outlines goals and action steps for the church to pursue? And if there is, how would a mission center, a congregation, or members engage in that? And I wonder what your perspective is from a field level. What's the vision, and what are the steps you could see us taking?
So I was feeling really blessed yesterday afternoon that those questions were for Steve and not me. But the way I'm envisioning it, and it's not just me, and I think we've already talked about it several times with Michigan members, I'm envisioning something that looks like, in some ways, a solar system with Christ at the center as the sun, and kind of orbiting would be international headquarters, which would be supporting mission at the mission center and congregational level, and as satellites, maybe to a congregation, but maybe to the mission center, or maybe to the field, which I left out. Satellites I see as these enduring principle or mission initiative based groups, where people who share a passion are coming together and living out that passion in a way that changes the world, at least in the place or places they are. And in that model, congregations would be, in some cases, resource congregations, or maybe it's the mission center that's providing the resource. And that resource is not necessarily financial It might be to start, but these groups really need to be financially self-sufficient. But the way I envision a resource congregation or a resource mission center is that they would be providing encouragement and maybe some know-how, maybe initially startup funds, but also sacramental ministry. So as members of these groups, perhaps several of them have met and fell in love and they want to marry, there's a way to connect them to a minister who can perform that sacrament, or maybe it's a baby blessing. So this interrelatedness where we're in orbit around each other and supporting each other. So it's still somewhat based on the mission center and congregational model, still pretty heavily based on that, but with these new groups in orbit around congregation, mission center, maybe field, working together. There was a second part of that question. Maybe. Strategy. Still working on the strategy part. We've been meeting, we've spent a year in discernment on that, and we're now kind of getting down to the business of figuring out how to implement that. I do think it's going to result in a church that is, in some ways, slightly decentralized. So there will be more decision making at the mission center and maybe even congregational level. I think we hope that it will be simpler, that we'll be more agile, able to pivot more quickly as new opportunities to develop. We're kind of in the midst of that work.
Thanks, Locke. Maybe to Dina, I wonder on a financial and asset side of the church, from a strategic planning focus, we've talked already today about the Bridge of Hope goal that is before us and has been. Are there guidelines or thoughts for congregations as they think about their building, but also their cash and their expenses? You know, is there a goal that a congregation should shoot for a reserve fund? And then if it goes past that, you know, are there any ideas or what strategic planning might look like for a congregation or for the mission center as we think about our assets?
So one of the kind of principles that's always valid for congregations is to have some type of operating reserve available. Just like as individuals, it's wise of us to have, whenever we're able, to have some savings set aside for emergencies, you know, like within our church properties. And for instance, we never know when maybe something's going to happen to the furnace but that advanced planning of having some type of operating reserve is always just a good practice and principle to have in place. There's varied opinions as to how much that should be. And sometimes it depends on the congregation's ability to fund it, but also it depends on their risk and their just that will sometimes determine how much they may set aside. But a good basic practice is to try to set aside at least 25% of the annual fixed expenses of a budget. But in some cases, many have chosen to do 6 months or even a year's worth. So that's not a hard and fast thing, but it's good to have at least something in place set aside for those rainy days that we know will come, especially when we're not expecting them. From a mission standpoint, my best advice and counsel on that is that we want to put our dollars towards the things that we are passionate about and the things that we believe that we are going to be able to support, not just financially, but with people resources. So often we think of an idea that we should do, and we might just put a line item in our budget for XYZ, and we're going to set aside, you know, ABC dollars for it. But we haven't really thought it through thoroughly from the standpoint of, do we have the people to support this ministry? Are we actually passionate about this? Because that is so critical that if we are not behind the things that we put within our budget, that we're not, even if we have dollars set aside for them, we're not going to do them, or we're going to do them, but we're probably not going to do them very well. So I think that whole idea of discernment of just what our ministry needs to look like, it flows into what our budgets look like as well. And that we put the dollars behind the things that we're passionate about so that they have a chance of being successful. That will look different in nearly every congregation. So I would not want to say, you need to make sure that you're putting, $10,000 towards such and such or anything like that, because it's going to look different in every setting, in every venue, because we all have different gifts and talents. Our communities have different needs, and we have different passions that we feel that we can get behind from a people resources. And people resources are absolutely critical to our mission. And that's what we're in the church for. We're in the church for the relationships with the people. So kind of a roundabout answer, but hopefully that's helpful somewhat.
There was a chat in the comment about Toronto Center Place as an example of Church 3.0. I'm not so sure. I really think that, they say beyond the walls. I think that beyond the walls really is 2.0. It's really a very traditional worship. It's just done from a studio church with a congregation around the world. John Dorauer in his Beyond Resistance argues that it's impossible for a 2.0 congregation to become a 3.0 expression. I think Toronto Center Place is an exception. I think they have done it, but it's not the Beyond the Walls service, because I think that's still traditional church. It's their philosophy and theology and history lectures on Tuesday nights. It's their meditations. It's their online chats. There's lots of way that they are 3.0, but I think Sunday morning is 2.0. So they have managed to do both, which I just think is stunning that they've been able to do that.
Sounds like our microphone went out. Were you not hearing?
I didn't hear anything. If it was to me, not sure who it was directed to.
Okay, I think we're back. We had a microphone change. So the question I was asking is just if you could talk further about the difference in philosophy or perspective instead of values between modern and postmodern, or however the language might be, versus just the change in format from in-person or traditional structure to online with the same philosophy.
Yeah, I think Steve did he did a much better job than I can, but I'll just lift up a few things that I understand are postmodern, that kind of impact how people might be comfortable in different areas. So postmoderns generally don't believe in universal truth. So the idea that, for example, there's one true church, or that Christianity is the only true path, the only way to salvation, is probably not meaningful to them. They might say what's true for you may or may not be true for me. And they're okay with that, with multiple truths. They generally are not fans of authority or institutions. I think we're seeing that lived out in many ways in our culture at the moment. So the idea that somebody is seminary trained, for example, isn't necessarily going to give them authority or credibility. It is relationship and authenticity. Sometimes I think we overuse that word, but I don't. In this context, I don't think so. It's all about being authentic. And if you are highly credentialed but deemed inauthentic, you're not going to be meaningful in the life of a postmodern. If you have no credentials, but they sense in you what they perceive as authenticity, I think they will value what you have to say. We've talked about the ways that people learn in kind of this postmodern way of being, and this is not new, but we've talked about how they have been learning. We have been teaching generations now to learn on screens, these really short bursts of information, and then we wonder why they're not so comfortable sitting there in church and listening to me preach for 30 minutes when the scene doesn't change. It's just me. Now, like many of the things we've talked about that have been challenges in the past, these are also opportunities. So suddenly we're worshiping with screens. We're using Zoom. We're using PowerPoints. So what were challenges are becoming opportunities.
Go ahead, Lee.
A follow-up on what Locke was saying about Beyond the Walls. I noticed yesterday when our worship services that we used several hymns from Beyond the Walls. And I know that they have requested funds to help them in their developing these Beyond the Walls hymns that we can use worldwide or use all over the local congregations for our Zoom services. And I'm wondering if there's any way that we can, as a mission center, send them some support for this. Question for you, Dan or Jesse. Jessica.
We don't have a line item in the Mission Center budget that funds worship or that directly. We'd have to review our line items and funds to see if anything like that would apply.
Well, I would encourage that we do that because since we are using their music, we are benefiting from their production of these hymns.
Dina, can you remind me what we need to do to use those as far as licensing?
So Beyond the Walls has given permission for other congregations to utilize their materials, but that does not mean that there is not still something that our congregations need to have in place as well. So I believe that many of our congregations that are utilizing those songs are already aware of what their individual needs are, but in case you are not, you need to also have purchased the applicable copyright license that those songs are being covered by. So if you have a one license or a CCLI copyright subscription, and many of you do through the group licensing program where we get a discount for the Mission Center, you need to have that license, but you would also need to have the streaming license that's part of it. So it will depend on the song itself as to whether or not it's a one license song or if it's a CCLI song as to whether or not you need both of those or just one of those. So those would be critical components for you to have, also acknowledging the proper permissions that are given. But fortunately, Beyond the Walls has been generous in allowing use of theirs, but we do still need to make sure that as a congregation, we have the streaming license and main license as well, unless it happens to be a song that's in the public domain, but many of them are not. Most of the ones that we are using will require that additional licensing. So if you're not sure if your congregation has the license or not, or if you have a license, but you may not have streaming, I have that complete list. So I'm happy to share that with anyone who is wondering what licenses you may or may not have at this point.
And typically Beyond the Walls builds in their licensing information in the video. Is the congregation need to add something with their licensing number?
Yep, ideally, yes. Somewhere on a slide somewhere, we need to have indicated either at the beginning of the end or, near the song, something like that. We need to have acknowledged that we have also secured that license and what our license number is. The main reason for that is so that if someone does come across it, they happen to see how we're streaming it. We want to have been providing our verification that we do indeed also have that licensing available.
So I just want to remind everyone who's joined us since the beginning that we're taking questions for the field leaders or the Mission Center leaders. You can enter them into the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom so that we can recognize you to ask your questions. I think we have any pending right now. One thing that President Veazey mentioned yesterday in his responses was about looking at leadership development. Next generation leaders, I think, was a phrase he used. We had asked what steps is Community of Christ taking to be more diverse, inclusive, and equitable in leadership, assets, materials. I'm wondering if you have any specifics that might follow up on that, or what resources are available, or how we're developing leaders in a diverse way by age or other ways.
So as an individual, what I have long done is tried to be very intentional about who I'm hiring, for example, at Community of Christ historic sites. I think our internships provide a wonderful foundation for future church engagement and leadership. And by putting young people in front of the general public, and this is not the reason we're there, but in that role, you might have 56 people standing in front of you, firing questions about you, at you, about what you believe and why, on deep theological issues. Questions that you've never even thought of because they come from a completely different context, religious context. And it is wonderful formational experience. So from the ground level, from these entry-level positions, I try and be very intentional about recruiting folks from diverse perspective, diverse backgrounds. That's one of the things that I've tried to do. So Dean has been kind enough to share some information with me, and she might have more detail, but let me start this. I know we think that money is often the reason we can't do things. There's just not enough money to do the things we want to do. I was stunned recently when I learned that in the Michigan Mission Center, between the mission center itself and the congregations, there is $7.3 million in the affiliate investment pool. About 4 million of that is in congregations. That's a lot of money. I think a lot of congregations have money in the affiliate investment pool that may or may not be using it. And I think sometimes because we think it's ours and not ours, it maybe isn't getting utilized in ways that might be helpful. So I just kind of wanted to make the point that there is money if we have ideas on how we might engage in mission. There is money in the Mission Center. We might have to go track it down, and I don't know how people would react to this. We might have to start thinking about sharing resources between a congregation that has money but maybe not the human power or the idea, and a group that has the human power and the idea. We might have to get creative about thinking about sharing, but there is a lot of money out there.
I think the only tag on to that I would add is that Locke lifted up the affiliate investment pool dollars. Many of our congregations do not invest in the affiliate investment pool, but they have other assets in other accounts. We've not done recently a kind of compilation of exactly how many assets are out there and other types of investments, but just from the handful of audits that I've done and that Jessica's done, we know that there are other resources available as well that we would encourage you looking at creative ways of how you may share those, as Locke has indicated, with other ministries and aspects and needs of the church, both with the Mission Center, your own congregation, and the Worldwide Church for both Worldwide Mission and also for Bridge of Hope. So.
And I'll throw out that, of course, we can't go out and spend $4 million tomorrow because we have minimum balances in place, but they won't be around forever. We're quickly moving towards our Bridge of Hope goal, and the goal that Dina and I have is to meet the Bridge of Hope goal with little or no AIP draw, no loan that will then have to be paid back, because that will be a significant burden on the church going forward if we have a major loan that we need to pay back because of the minimum balance draw. So we're hoping not to do that.
Regarding the minimum balances, the Locke mentioned the 7.3 million, that's the cumulative affiliate investment pool balances. The minimum balance portion of that is just about a little bit more than $2 million. So that still means that there's 5 million that's free and clear to be able to be utilized for other things as well.
We would love to hear questions from any of you who have joined us. What would you like to know?
A lot of questions focused on World Church, which we're happy to answer, but it seems like folks probably have questions for Dan and the Mission Center officers as well.
Laritha? No, we're not hearing you, Laritha.
There?
Yes.
I just want to go back to the Giving Tuesday a minute, Locke or Dina. Is that money pointed for something special? Does that all go to the Bridge of Hope, or what happens with that money on Giving Tuesday?
Giving Tuesday dollars support worldwide mission tithes, so the annual operating expenses of the worldwide church. But that's a great question, Laritha. Lots of people do ask that, and it's a good one to lift up for everyone. So worldwide mission tithes is the beneficiary of all of those generous donations provided on Giving Tuesday.
So my understanding of the matching giving for this coming Tuesday then, well, if we make $250,000, that'll be matched for that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Tuesday, November 30, Giving Tuesday, November 30, up to $250,000 in giving will be matched, which obviously is $500,000, which would be a pretty good day.
I'd say, thank you.
For anyone who has joined us, we are just taking questions you might have for the Mission Center leaders, or the field leaders. Well, we're not seeing any others. I'll check for sure. Are there any on Facebook? Steve Bouveret.
My question today would be, explain, if you would, briefly for everyone, and myself included, the concept of Bridge of Hope.
So Locke, you want me to tackle it or you?
Feel free.
Okay. So Bridge of Hope is a multifaceted project of the church. The first phase of Bridge of Hope is to accomplish the retirement responsibility, which you may have heard us talk about for the last several years, which is an objective to try to fully fund the retirement benefits of those employees of the church, both past and present, in regards to just having that pension fund and retirement benefits fully funded. Once that objective is accomplished, which is that $120 million by January 1 of 2024, the next aspect, which is also critically important for the future of the church, is to build up our endowments. Our endowments, it's not that we don't have them, but they are mostly tied up with real estate, so they aren't liquid and available to fund operations of the church. And we would like to get to a point where we can continue and start again to use those dollars to build up the endowments to support the operations of the church. Hopefully that's helpful, Steve. If you have further questions, let me know. And Locke can chime in and add something to my 2 cents. So.
Who else has a question?
I'll throw a little background on Bridge of Hope out just because I live in the world of history. So our pension for church employees was really very well funded up until the 2000 or shortly thereafter. We were in really good shape. With the 2008 economic downturn, church financial leaders knew that we had pretty significant financial obligations to retirees coming up, and they needed to preserve assets in order to meet those obligations for retirees. So they took a more conservative position in the market to protect remaining assets, which I'm sure was the reasonable and rational thing to do at the time. In hindsight, that meant that we didn't fully participate in the market recovery. And so we are catching up from that. We also are blessed, and I want to stress that this is a blessing, in that our retirees, who for the longest time we paid almost nothing, but promised to take care of them until they were in the ground. Our retirees are making responsible choices and living far longer than the actuarial studies suggested they would long ago, which means those expenses have been greater, and that's a wonderful thing. But it means it's been more expensive than was planned for early on. So a few of the things that have impacted the need to catch up with our retirement responsibility. Let me also throw out that we made a shift. I don't remember the exact year, Dina might, maybe 2015, and we moved away from a pension plan to a defined contribution plan. So the pension plan was frozen, and employees moved to a 403B, I think it is, from the pension plan.
Okay, well, it seems we don't have any other questions. Maybe a final question then is to focus on our conference theme, which is taken from Doctrine and Covenants 162:8 as a guiding scripture in the theme of live prophetically. Wonder if you have any thoughts for us on what it means to you to live prophetically.
So this is something that folks in the Grand Rapids area have heard me talk about before. For me, I think of it as this concept of imitatio Christi, to imitate Christ. My goal, and hopefully the goal of others, is to go through life imitating Christ and Christ's mission. And so to call others to do the same, whether in some cases that might be returning to that path, or in other cases that might calling forward into that path. For me, that's how I frame living prophetically.
Thanks, Luck. I would just share from the perspective of the Mission Center and President team and leaders as we thought about this conference. We chose the theme because it has open for interpretation for individuals to think about what that means. For years, we've been asked to think about how to be a prophetic people as a group, and also to live as individually into prophetic witness. And I think, so for some of us, that means to look to the future, to look ahead and to see what is changing around us and how the message of the gospel continues to be lived out in new ways, but also to think about the tradition of the prophets within Scripture and to focus on challenging cultural, political, and religious trends, to know that prophets throughout history have been people on the margins, sometimes with people in the margins, who have had to speak to leaders who don't see the harm that's being done in culture. And so that is an avenue we want to lift up. When we say live prophetically, it calls us to challenge those structures and to think in new and difficult ways. So we expect that we'll be journeying with this theme of living prophetically into next year, as we continue to explore what we do with our resources, how we live out discipleship and leadership formation in Michigan in particular. And so as we come out throughout the year with new events and activities, retreats, gatherings, and classes, I think you'll expect to see things that are in those avenues of speaking prophetically, speaking boldly to culture, living in new ways, I think, as President Veazey suggested, or showing how to live in a way that's counter to maybe the dominant narrative in culture. We are planned to take a break now until 11, since we don't see any other questions coming in. We'll leave the Zoom meeting up, but we'll end our live and recording for this period. You can stay connected to Zoom if you'd like. And the chat will be open, I believe, if you want to chat with others who are in the meeting. And we'll see you just briefly before 11 to gather. A reminder that we will be celebrating communion. So have bread and wine at your location. And we also had a request to have something to write on and something to write with during the worship. Just for yourself, have something to write with and write on as part of the worship experience. All right, thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll come back on at 11.